Hi, this is Paul Sackett, Good News Planet, speaking with Maggie Anton. Hi, Maggie. How are you?
I'm fine, Paul, and how are you?
Okay, good. You're a prolific author. And is that okay to say that?
I guess. I only started being an author when when I was 55, so I don't consider myself that I'm that prolific. Otherwise, I would have started earlier, I guess.
And what did you do earlier? For 55
Actually,
years?
I was a chemist for 35 years. Yeah, a clinical chemist. I worked at the hospital laboratory,
Really?
doing chemistry, toxicology, and then when genetic testing became invented in late 1980s, then I started doing genetic testing.
So could you make like two of me?
No, no, but I could find out if you have any genetic defects or metabolic disorders.
I could tell you there are none whatsoever.
That's good.
A perfect specimen in my own mind. So, well, that's pretty wild. Why did you go into chemistry? What was it about chemistry that interested you?
Well, I don't know. I always liked science, even though, back when I was growing up, girls weren't supposed to do that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And but it interested me. I found out I was good at it, and I liked finding, how the chemicals, reacted, and how the, basis of, life and everything that there is was put together in atoms and molecules. And, perhaps it was interesting, being particularly attractive because it was a field that girls didn't study. And clearly that has been something that attracted me, because that's how I got into studying Talmud.
You got into the study of Talmud from chemistry. The first time I've ever heard something like this.
Well, I hadn't made the connection until right now, but I got into Talmud in 1992. I heard about a women's Talmud class, and Talmud, even more than chemistry, has been restricted to males and men since it was redacted 1,500 years ago. And I admit, I signed up for the class because I wanted to see what this Jewish stuff was that women weren't supposed to study. And to my surprise, I fell in love with Talmud, and I became fascinated by it. And I've been studying Talmud for 20 years. So it may be that the fact that women were excluded from these studies actually was a connection between my studying chemistry and studying Talmud.
So when you say you study it, how involved are you with Talmud? To what degree? I mean, do you do the readings every day? How involved are you?
I do. Okay, I study Talmud. Well, I have once a week where I meet with a study partner, but there are times during the week when I prepare in advance for our study session. So generally, I'm looking at some Talmud a few times a week, and my new book, HISDA'S Daughter, takes place in Talmudic times in 3rd century Babylonia. The characters are the folks in the Talmud, the rabbinic families, and so all the research for this novel involves Talmud study, or study about Talmud, the history of the Talmud and the time in which it was created. So I'm really quite immersed in Talmud these days.
It all makes sense. You're the author of HISDA'S Daughters, a trilogy. Book 1, Apprentice.
Rashi's Daughters, the trilogy, was my first. That was actually about Talmud too, because Rashi was the great Talmud commentator. And that trilogy is finished. I decided not to write Rashi's granddaughters. And moved from 11th century. So I moved from 11th century France to 3rd century Babylonia.
Okay. So now we're talking about HISDA'S daughter. Do I pronounce
Right,
that
Rav
properly?
HISDA'S daughter. Right.
All righty, and that's your new one, A Novel of Love, the Talmud, and Sorcery, Sorcery. What's sorcery? How does sorcery fit in here?
Yes, that was actually quite a surprise to me because I didn't realize the sorcery angle until I started studying more about Rav HISDA and his family and trying to figure out how I knew I wanted to write about Rav HISDA'S daughter because there was a little scene actually from the Talmud where she's in her father's classroom. He's a rabbi and teaching students who are mostly teenage boys. And he calls up his two best students in front of her, and he asks her, which one do you want to marry? And she's maybe 9 or 10 years old. And this is pretty astonishing because, first of all, that she even had a choice. 3rd century Babylonia, I don't think girls got much of a choice. But the fact that he should ask in front of the two boys and in front of the whole class was pretty amazing. And then she, even more amazingly, answers both of them. And that is eventually what happens. First she marries the older one, then she's widowed, and then she marries the other one. And so as I knew I wanted to write about her. She was such an extraordinary person. But my first research was to try and figure out, okay, I need some women's names, so authentic women's names from this time period. And as I started studying, I learned about these things called Babylonian incantation bowls. And they were like regular pottery bowls that have been unearthed in Iraq, which is what Babylonia used to be. And they have incantations, spells, written on the inside of them. And they were put underneath houses, upside down. And the spells are to protect the inhabitants from demons and from the evil eye. And they're definitely Jewish, because they're written in Aramaic like the Talmud, and they call upon Jewish angels, and they quote the Bible. And I started realizing, whoa, there was a lot of what we would call magic going on back then. These bowls were very popular, and they're mentioned in the Talmud, and also the Talmud mentions demons and amulets and how you protect against demons and how you know what's a spell that works. And the Talmud talks about sorceresses. They insist that sorcery is the province of women. There's even a head sorceress, if you can imagine a sorcery hierarchy back in those days. And when I realized that this was the province of women, and it had to be literate women who, these are very long spells, and as I said, they quote the Bible and call upon Jewish angels. So I kind of put it together that the women who are writing these incantations, who are inscribing these bowls, would likely be from rabbinic families, because who else would be so literate? And I found a section in the Talmud where my character protects her husband from demons, and that's when I realized, she's a sorceress too. Well, if she's a sorceress, then she has to learn how to be a sorceress, not like Harry Potter where she goes off to some sorcery school, but certainly there would be teachers and mentors, and suddenly there's a whole new piece of my story about her that's going to involve learning magic. And it opened up this whole new world of research into ancient Jewish magic, of which there was quite a lot. It was really a surprise to me to discover how ubiquitous this was. Everybody wore amulets. It's not like they had much else to protect themselves from illness.
What do you, when you say amulets, what do you mean? In what regard?
Okay, an amulet would be, let's say, a small piece of parchment written with a spell saying, protect so-and-so, son of so-and-so, from any illness and demon, and keep him healthy, and God should protect him, and it would be inside a little, like maybe leather bag, or if you were wealthier, maybe a metal, a little small container, and the person would wear it around their neck or maybe around their arm. And it protected them. Soldiers apparently wore protective amulets a lot. There's a description in Josephus where some general wants to divide his army into two groups, and instead of doing like sound off 1, 2, he says, okay, everybody with an amulet on this side and everybody without an amulet on that side, except there wasn't anybody without an amulet. Almost the entire army is wearing an amulet. He had to find some other method to divide them up. And those amulets are still, and I don't mean just ancient amulets. People, you could buy those things in Jerusalem now. Amulets for protection against all kinds of things. It was, I guess people figure it can't hurt.
Let me ask you another question. The Talmud, what's the Talmud?
Okay, the Talmud is really a compendium of Jewish law, and it was created after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the 2nd century. And of course, once the temple's gone, Judaism has this giant upheaval that the whole religion depends on going to the temple and making sacrifices, and the priests making atonement for you. And without the temple and the priests, the Jews were certainly floundering for what to do for a religion. But at this time, the rabbis and synagogues kind of come into prominence, and they realize the Jews need to know what are the Jewish laws that they can still follow. But you would have to know the whole Bible by heart, because the laws are scattered in all the different books. So they collected the laws of the Sabbath. They put them in a book called the Sabbath, and they collected all the laws of marriage and divorce. They put it into a book called, women, Hashem. They collected laws about commerce and things like that. So they took all those laws and put them together in one volume, which is called Mishnah, and the Mishnah is part of the Talmud. But of course, as soon as they essentially collected it and wrote it down, then you have some wise guy who says, well, what about this case? You didn't mention what we do in this situation. And there's actually some Mishnah that contradict other ones, and somebody had to point that out. So all this giant long discussion of what do we do in this case turns into the Talmud. And that goes on for like 500 years.
So is that when lawyers were created?
Yes, exactly. The rabbis originally were the judges and the lawyers, and yes, that's you can safely say that's
safely say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's when lawyers were.
What's an incantation?
An incantation is a fancy word for a magic spell.
No. Okay. All right. Very interesting stuff. This is really, I don't know, the battles of Zoroastrian.
Yeah.
Is that where Zorro got his name?
I don't know about that. But, no, it's fascinating because the Bible says you should not let a sorceress live. You'd think that there were no sorceresses because of that, but Judaism is very clear that almost anything is permitted for healing purposes, to save a life, to help someone who's sick. And these spells and incantations and amulets and magic bowls were almost all for benign protective purposes. And so they were not only permitted, the rabbis encouraged it. Which is counterintuitive when you see the place in the Bible that says that sorceresses should be killed. And then you find out, well, the definition of a sorceress got to be so narrow that there really weren't any, as far as the rabbis and powers that be were concerned.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, Maggie, you got a lot going on here.
Oh, gosh, yes.
A lot went on. Let me ask you one last question at this moment here. There's a lot more to be told, and the book is called Rav HISDA'S Daughter, right?
Right.
And you have a website of the same name.com, and we'll link over to that. So my last question is, what's good news for you?
What's good news for me?
Yes.
Well, good news is that I have gotten a starred review for Rav HISDA'S daughter in Library Journal, and I'm not Dan Brown. The world doesn't know about me that much. So to get a starred review, a really good review in a mainstream media publication is just fantastic news for me. And on a personal front, my daughter is going to be having a baby in November.